טוב, אנחנו נתחיל, אני לא יודעת אם מגיעים עוד או לא. English, sorry. We're going to talk about the really big change that was done in the Middle Ages as far as the way Jews related to non-Jews. So I want to give you first the main sources, mostly in English. Some of them I didn't translate, and I'll translate it as I go along. Okay, so we're going to start off with a few verses from the book of Deuteronomy, where specifically the Bible talks about the seven peoples, seven nations that lived in the land of Canaan when the Israelites were supposed to conquer it. And the language is very, very, very strong there. It says, when the Lord your God shall bring you to the land that you are about to possess, and he dislodges many nations before you. And which are these nations? The Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, Hivites, and yet Jebusites. All of these people. 7 nations much larger than you. And the Lord delivers them to you, and you shall defeat them. Then it says, you must doom them to destruction, grant them no terms and give them no quarter. Actually, the language in Hebrew is different, and because it says in Hebrew, lo techonem, the translation doesn't do justice to it, because they translate it as not allowing them maybe to not allowing them to be with you in any way. The rabbis understood from the word in Hebrew, lo techonem, that you're not supposed to let them live in the land. And the Bible says you shall not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children again away from me to worship other gods. And the Lord's anger will blaze forth against you, and he will promptly wipe you out. Instead, this is what you do to them. You shall tear down their altars, smash their pillars, cut down their sacred posts, consign their images to fire. For you are a people consecrated to the Lord your God. Of all the peoples on earth, the Lord thy God chose you to be his treasured people. So you see that these 7 people, these original 7 people who were in Canaan, where the people of Israel were supposed to conquer, they were supposed to just be completely destroyed, killed, don't leave any of them alive. They are also idolaters, and they are also, if you intermarry with them, you will go in the wrong way. You will have intermarriage, and you will have immorality. So the Bible has very, very, very strong language against these 7 nations that were in the land of Canaan. If we check the Talmud, they talk about that Rabbi Yochanan says the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzavak, that by a majority vote it was resolved in the upper chambers of the house of Mitzah and Yehuda, that in every other law of the Torah, if a man is commanded transgress and suffer not death, he may transgress and not suffer death, except idolatry, incest, which includes adultery and murder. That is, there are 3 major sins that their punishment is death, and one of them is idolatry. So it's one of the most severe laws that one cannot transgress, and therefore all throughout the sources they will relate to this as something very, very grave. Now, the Talmud itself sometimes talks about that sometimes you will deal with these non-Jews who live in the land of Israel, but it's only because you want to avoid hate, mishum eva in Hebrew, or mipnei darkei shalom, for the sake of peace. That is, you are living among non-Jews and you want to make sure that that you can continue living there and you can make a living, etc. So it's not that you really appreciate them as human beings. It's not that you you want to you look at their humanity exactly like Jews, except that it's convenient for us as Jews to get along well with them because they are the ones in charge. They are the ones who are governing, and so we need to avoid having hate, and we need to be in good relations with them for the sake of peace. So there are many examples of this. For example, in the Talmud and Gittin, it says that you're supposed to support poor non-Jews with poor Jews, and visit the sick of the non-Jews with the sick of the Jews, and bury the sick of the non-Jews with the sick of the Jews. But all of this is for the sake of peace. That is, we don't want the non-Jews to say, oh, look at these Jews. They are just worried about themselves. And if one of us is dying or hungry, they're not going to do anything. So therefore, to be on good terms with them because we live among the non-Jews, then we are going to relate to them in a humane fashion as well. And other example in the Talmud and Baba Metzia, it says that since you're supposed to, if an animal is falling under the weight that it's on top of it, if he's a Jew, you're supposed to help him get up and help him remove the weight. But if it's a non-Jew, you're not really supposed to. You're not required. So they tell us if it's a biblical requirement that animals shouldn't suffer, then we should be required just as much with an animal of a Jew as with a non-Jew. So that what they answer is that it's not because it's a biblical requirement, it is because we want to avoid hate. We want to make sure that the non-Jews do not hate us for not helping them when they are in need. Give you a few other examples. Other examples that appear in the Mishnah and in the Talmud are, for example, when they say that before their holidays of the non-Jews, 3 days before and 3 days 3 days before, you are not allowed to do business with them, and you're not supposed to borrow something or lend them something or collect money that they owe you or pay them money that they owe you. And why are there all these restrictions? Rashi explains on that Mishnah that that is because if we do this, they will go on their holiday to their prayer house and they will thank their idols for all of these things, for having received the money, for having done good business, etc. So we don't want them thanking their idols because of something we did, so we do not do business with them a few days before their holiday already. Another example is whether you can sell them if you can sell them animals like goats and small animals like that. Some places do and some places don't. And then also you cannot sell them all kinds of things that you have you're growing in the land. Only if you have something that's still growing in the land, you can give it to them. But if you're something that you already cut, then you can give it to them. And it also says you should not rent them houses in Israel, and of course you should not rent them fields. And all of this is because we don't want them to be to be occupying part of the land. And then they have such terrible opinion of these non-Jews that they say that you cannot put an animal in a hotel together with a non-Jew because they're afraid that the non-Jews are going to have relations with animals. And also somebody shouldn't be alone with a non-Jew because you're afraid that he might kill you. And a Jewish woman shouldn't give birth to a child of a non-Jewish woman because that child is going to be an idolater. And a Jewish woman should not give milk to a child of a non-Jew because of the same reason. And then they give other examples. You should not use their wine or their vinegar, that's wine vinegar, you shouldn't use for them either. So there's a lot of limitations of things that the rabbi said you should not do with the non-Jews. Of course, the non-Jews that are talking about are the non-Jews of the Talmud that are idolaters and that have a very low moral level as well. A very, very strong source is the one from the Mishnah in Yoma, where it says that even though when somebody's life is in danger, you can transgress the Sabbath if something fell down, rocks fell down on people, and you don't know if there's anyone alive there, and you don't know if the person who's alive there is a Jew or a non-Jew, then you're allowed to remove everything to try to save the people. But it's very clear from this source that if you're sure that all of the ones who got stuck under these rocks were non-Jews, then you cannot not leave the Sabbath aside. So we see that it's very, very clear opinion about how you treat what you do for non-Jews. What do you do for non-Jews? According to the Talmud, you have to be very careful because you are not going to do something on Shabbat that's forbidden if it's to save a non-Jew. That's what it says very clearly in the early Mishnah and Talmudic sources. Okay. Any comments until here? Okay. So I want to show you the early sources because we're going to see that there's a development as time goes by, where it's not only because we want to avoid that they hate us, or because we want to for the sake of peace with the non-Jews we do it, but there's a later development in the Middle Ages where they think that you have to treat a non-Jew in a different way as a human being, and not only because you want to avoid hate or you want to do it for the sake of peace. There's a very interesting source in the Maimonides in the Mishneh Torah where he talks about Christians and Muslims. We'll see later on that he did think that Christians were idolaters, not Muslims. We'll see later on. But here he talks about that even if he considers Christians to be idolaters, they still have an important role to fulfill in his time. He says all of these things that we talk about of the Jesus the Christian or the Nazarene and the Ishmaelite that came after him, he means Muhammad, they're all taking us in the direction of the Messianic times, and they're making the situation better, and people are going to serve God together, as it says in the verse in Zephaniah, for then I will convert the people to a pure language, that all of them call in the name of the Lord to worship him of one accord. So according to Maimonides, even though Jesus and his Christian religion wasn't pure monotheism, both Christianity and Islam advance us in the right direction, in the right belief. And even if they're not the pure and true religious, they are taking the people of the world in the right direction. He wrote about this in many of his writings. In one of his Responsum 448, he wrote specifically about the Muslims, that the Ishmaelites are not at all idolaters. As opposed to what he thinks of the Christians, he's convinced that the Muslims are completely not idolatrous. Idolatry has long been severed from their mouths and hearts, and they attribute to God a proper unity, a unity concerning which there is no doubt. And because they lie about us, is no reason for us to lie about them and say that they are idolaters. If you pay attention to Muslim houses of worship, the mosques, they only have geometric designs. They don't have statues or images like you have at least in the Catholic churches. So he says they are really praying to the one God. And should anyone say that the house that they honor, the Kaaba is that big rock that there is in Mecca, which originally was a rock that the idolaters worship, and then it became to symbolize Islam, not anymore as idolatry. So if you think that the Kaaba is a house of idolatry, and an idol is hidden within it, which their ancestors used to worship, then what of it? The hearts of those who bow down towards it today are directed only toward heaven. So even if originally the Kaaba was worshipped by idolaters, today Muslims who go to Mecca and worship to the Kaaba are worshiping to the one true God, pure monotheism. Regarding the Ishmaelites of today, idolatry has been severed from their mouths of all of them, including women and children. Their error and foolishness is in other things which cannot be put into writing. Well, they believe in other things which we do not believe in, but he cannot write about it because of the renegades and wicked among Israel, about their apostate. So he won't mention the aspects in which they are mistaken. But as regards to the unity of God, they have no error at all. So it's very clear that according to Maimonides, the Muslims are a pure monotheistic religion. And even if they're not the true religion and they have some mistakes, their belief in one God is a pure belief in one God. And therefore, different from what we're going to see in a little while, how he looked at the Christians, that the Muslims certainly do not belong to the categories that we looked at in the Talmud. In his book, the Mishneh Torah, where he wrote the law, he wrote about in a few places about the Christians. He wrote clearly that the Christians are idolaters, and Sunday is their holiday. Therefore, you cannot do business with them. And in Israel, on Thursday and Friday of every week, and of course on Sabbath and on Sunday. It's forbidden, and that's what we do with them in all of their holidays. We saw already before that the Mishnah said that we don't want to run the risk that somebody is going to go and thank their God for the business that they did with the Jews, and therefore, since he considers them idolatry, you're not supposed to do business with them most of the week. And of course, we always have to consider that Maimonides lived among Muslims, so that was the environment that he knew. And there he saw that their mosques were devoid of any statues and of any pictures, and there were no saints, and there was no Trinity, etc. But he didn't live among Christians, so it really wasn't a practical question for him. But from what he understood about Christianity, he considered them to be idolatry, even though he said that it's idolatry that's better than the Talmudic idolatry that takes us in the right direction. In his commentary to the Mishnah, he also talks about their holidays, and he says 3 days besides that very day of the holiday, that is, like we said now, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and we will not lend anything from them or lend them something, because they will thank their their gods, and they will, because of us, they will be thanking idolatry. He says, however, if it's not a written contract but an oral contract, you could do business with them because you're saving the money that otherwise you may never get. But we are going back to what said in the Mishnah, and he still applies it to the Christians, that you're not supposed to do business with them. And this, of course, would be very, very difficult for those who live in Christian countries. For him, it is not a practical issue. It's okay. Let me see. Somebody wrote something here. Hey, Susan, you want to explain a little more what you wanted, what you meant?
Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm just wondering if I'm grasping the point you're trying to help us understand with these selected sources. So you have, on the one hand, a desire for us to get along and be respectful of other belief systems or other cultures for the sake of peace, but yet we need to step back and think what kind of interaction we're supposed to have with these individual peoples that are non-Israelite or non-Jews. In the case of by Maimonides' time, we're referring to ourselves as Jews. So could you confirm that that's what these sources are pushing us to conclude, or is there something I'm missing?
The early sources were writing in times of pure idolatry, the Romans, right? So they wanted to keep as much of the distance as possible. And they really didn't want you to have any contact that could somehow promote idolatry. That's why you weren't supposed to do business with them and all the rest of it. But yet, the Talmud itself talks about certain circumstances in which you visit them when they're sick, you bury them when they die, you give them the money if they're poor, etc. But that is for our own interest, because we live among the non-Jews, and so we don't want them to hate us, and we want to have, for the sake of peace. You're not talking in the Talmud about respecting their beliefs, like you just said. In the Talmud, they're clear that it's complete idolatry, and they're not respecting their beliefs. Not only not respecting their beliefs, but they're not respecting these people as people, because the moment they believe in idolatry, you sort of erase them. And that's the big change that comes in the Middle Ages. It's not because they looked at the sources differently. They lived in a different situation. When a rabbi writes a responsa or writes codes, he or she writes taking into account the time, the place, and the circumstances. It's not that somebody wakes up in the morning and says, now we're going to be more liberal. No, it's now I live among Christians or among Muslims, and they are the governors, and they are the ones who are going to define how everybody treats me. So I better, find a way to live among them and protect myself. Okay, that's what's the early sources. The Maimonides already gives us a different viewpoint, at least as far as the Muslims, because he considers them 100% pure monotheist believers. They may have mistakes, he says, in their belief, but they still believe in only one God, and whatever they pray is towards that one God, and they have no idols, etc., etc. Therefore, we're gonna see later that you can even allow praying in a mosque, because a mosque doesn't have any statues or anything. But the Christians, he's still considered to be idolatrous. He still said that they're better than the idolaters of the Talmud, but they're still idolatry. And we're going to read something about his philosophy also in a minute. And we're going to read later on other approaches in the Middle Ages, also toward the Christians. Okay. Somebody else wrote something here. Heidi. I'm sure that the historical circumstances influence. I'm sure that that has something to do with it also. I don't know. You want to be more specific?
Yeah, just the laws again, what you just read, it was quite harsh. And I'm wondering how much, like the Roman Empire, like outlawed Judaism and strongly persecuted Jews. So would make sense. And I think maybe in other periods.
I'm sure that, but the truth is that the Christians and the Muslims in the Middle Ages were not always so nice either.
Yeah.
They also persecuted. But they still felt that they had to be able to live among them. And you can't, if you say you can't do business with them 3 days a week, and you can't do anything, you can't live like that if you live among non-Jews. So you have to find a pragmatic way to be able to live among them. So everyone had a different viewpoint. We'll see a few more now. Maimonides is basically about the Muslims, that he considered them to be a pure monotheistic religion. Okay, just a minute. Okay. So, I wanted to bring you something of his philosophy, so you understand in what cultural context he writes this. All of the philosophers in the Middle Ages, whether they were Muslim, Christians, or Jews, they were all following Greek philosophy with a Muslim twist that made it fit monotheistic belief. So they all use the same Aristotelian or Platonic logic, but they had to change it a bit because there's a belief in a personal God which is not existent in the philosophers. So he says the arguments of the philosophers undoubtedly involve certain principles which concern the three communities, Jews, Christians, and Mohammedans, such as creatio ex nihilo. Creatio ex nihilo is creation from nothing. There was nothing there before, and then the world was created, which afforded support to the belief in miracles and to various other doctrines. There are, however, other subjects of belief which the Christians and Mohammedans have undertaken to defend, such as the doctrine of the Trinity. And this is one of the things that annoys Maimonides the most. How can you say there's a Father, a Son, and a Holy Spirit, and declare that you are monotheistic religion? Because after all, you're talking about a plurality within the God. So he considers this to be a terrible mistake. He says, this question, namely whether the universe has been created or is eternal, cannot be answered with mathematical certainty. Here, human intellect must pause. We shall have occasion to speak more fully on this subject, but for the present it may suffice to state that the philosophers have for the last 3,000 years been continually divided on that subject, as far as we can learn from their works and record of their opinions. If you read all of the philosophers up to the time of Maimonides, there are those who think the world was created, there are those who think the world always existed, and there are those who think that there was an eternal matter from which at some point the world was created. But what Maimonides says very clearly is that you cannot prove this through the intellect. All of these opinions can be equally valid rationally. And if you have ever read Kant and his critique of the pure reason, you will see that he is able to prove logically both that the world is eternal and that the world was created. If you can prove opposite opinions, it means you're really not proving any of them, and you don't know for sure. So at one point he says that even though we can't really, since we can't prove it either way, he will remain with the opinion of the prophets that say that the world is created. But he also says in another place that if we could prove that the world was eternal, then he would interpret the sources to mean that the world was eternal. So even though he says we can't prove about creation from nothing, there are three principles: the existence of God, his unity, and his incorporeality, that can be fully proved and verified, irrespectively of the question whether the universe has beginning or not. and accept this theory is supported by the authority of the prophets. My method, as far as I now can explain in general terms, is as follows. The universe is either eternal or has had a beginning. If it had a beginning, this is clear to common sense. For a thing that has a beginning cannot be the cause of its own beginning. Another must have caused it. The universe was therefore created by God. If, on the other hand, the universe were eternal, it could be viewed in various ways, be proved that apart from the things which constitute the universe, there exists a being which is neither body nor a force in a body, and which is one eternal, not preceded by any course and immutable. That being is God. So if the universe was eternal, God is also eternal, and He created the world. So this is the view of all of the monotheistic religions. Believe that there is only one God, that the God created the world, and he says, even though I can't prove it logically. And up to the Rambam, we have only the Muslims as being a monotheistic religion. And he considered the Christians to be idolatry. Now, when we go to the Rabbeinu Nissim, he's called the Ram. He's a rabbi from Spain in the 14th century. He writes in one of his comments on the Talmud that all of the saints of the non-Jews and the crazy one of the Ishmaelites, he means Muhammad, even if they're not mistaken about the God itself, because they pray, since they pray to this prophet, which is really not correct, because the Muslims do not pray to the prophet. Their belief is that there is only one God, and Muhammad is his prophet, but they don't prostrate themselves to Muhammad. Okay, but he thinks that they prostrate themselves as a God also to the prophet, and therefore it's like idolatry, and they're forbidden like idolatry. And he is the only one of the medieval commentators who considers Islam to be idolatry. And of course, like I said before, that circumstances, the time and place is very relevant. He lives among Christians, so for him, it's a theoretical question. It doesn't really make a difference to him if the Muslims are idolatry or not. But those who live among Muslims need to find a way around that. Just like the ones who live among Christians need to find a way to deal with Christianity. Nobody writes in a vacuum. Yes, Susan.
So this rabbi from Spain, he's living in highly Catholic Spain before the Moors penetrate Spain over Gibraltar.
Yes.
So he's not yet exposed to all the Islamic culture. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that, because I don't know how well people know history who are in our audience. So it's fascinating that, because the Spanish leadership, the Spanish family was devout Catholics and persecuted anyone who is non-Catholic. So in Europe, joined forces with other European leaders.
Well, there were different periods of time. This is not in the time of the expulsion from Spain. It's 100 years before.
Okay. So thank you for clarifying that.
So a very interesting perspective is that of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam is Rashi's grandchild. He's one of the Tosafists. And in one of his comments, he writes that that even though the Christians swear by their saints, they don't see them as gods, and it's not idolatry, because they believe that there is one God who made heaven and earth. And even though they also talk about the Virgin and the saints and the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, etc., it's not that they don't give them the same status as God. There is a verse in the Bible that says, before a blind person, you will not put an obstacle. Okay, the plain meaning of that text is that you can't really put a physical obstacle in front of a blind person so that they will stumble. but it is used in the rabbinic sources to mean that if we're going to make people make a mistake, then we're making it like stumbling before a blind, and therefore the question is, if we allow, we recognize as monotheism these Christians who believe in Trinity, maybe we are putting a obstacle before a blind. But he says that is not the case, because Noahides, that is descendants of Noah, who are not descendants of Jews, were not warned about that, and they're not forbidden to have a combination of different aspects of the deity, so that even a Jew who believes in plurality within God would be idolatrous. A Christian who has these different aspects within the deity would not be considered idolatrous. And that's the way that he justifies that they're not really idolatrous. And if they're not idolatrous, then you can do business with them, you can do all kinds of things with them, and you live among them, and you resolve this very difficult situation that you have if you have to follow the Talmudic law. Okay. The most interesting in the Middle Ages is the Meiri, Rabbi Menachem Meiri. His texts were not known until about the beginning of the 20th century. And he has a completely different perspective. He's not saying, oh, well, because they're non-Jews, they can have a plurality. Oh, because we want to be on good terms with them, then we better, do business with them, etc. He's actually saying, because they are believing in one God exactly like us, they should be treated humanely exactly like you would treat a Jew. He's going much further than all of the ones we had at this point. And he makes up a concept which is peoples who go in the way of religion. He means of monotheistic religion. And basically he means Muslims and Christians. Those are the ones who are monotheistic religions in his time. And he lives in Provence. So again, he is among Christians, but he considers this perspective to be valid both for Christians and for Muslims. And so we're going to see some of the things that he said. Menachem HaMeiri, he wrote a commentary on the Talmud, which is called Beit HaBchira. So he quotes the Talmud and then he explains it. And also in his Beit HaBchira, he usually quotes the commentary of the Mishnah of Maimonides also. So he brings a verse from Leviticus that says, after the doings of the land of Egypt in which you dwelt, shall you not do, and after the doings of the land of Canaan into which I bring you, you shall not do, neither you shall walk in their practice. That's what it says in the Bible, in the book of Leviticus. You shouldn't do anything like what the Egyptians and the Canaanites do, because they have practices that are idolatrous, and you should keep as far away from them as possible. And he said this does not apply to those bound by the way of religion. So we are reinterpreting what it means to be idolatry. To be idolatry is not anything that isn't Jewish. To be idolatry is anyone who does not believe in a monotheistic religion. And Christians and Muslims believe in a monotheistic religion, even if they make some mistakes and have some beliefs that we wouldn't be able to adopt, but they're still, like, in a way, like what Maimonides say, they're moving people of the world in the right direction, even if it's not pure monotheism yet, but it is monotheism. And that's what the Meiri thinks, that both Christians and Muslims are monotheistic religions, and therefore he says, for example, one can do business with them on their holidays. That's one example. You must pay for damage to their property, return their lost animals, and other obligations towards fellow Jews that do not apply to idolaters. All of these things that we studied in the Mishnah that made it very difficult for non-Jews can be set aside because we don't consider them idolaters. We consider them to be monotheistic religions, even if they have some mistakes here and there. Any comments?
Yes, I have a question. How influential were the rabbis, not Maimonides, on how Jews felt? You mentioned Meiri. You said that he wasn't known until the recently. How important were the others?
Well, actually, I can show you some more modern responsa. A lot of them followed Maimonides as far as Islam, because he was very clear that Islam is in no way monotheism. So they allowed things like praying in a mass and all kinds of things, because it only has geometrical forms. It has no idols. It has no pictures, etc., etc. As far as the others, those who wanted to reject Christianity as a monotheistic religion quoted the Ran, but he's the only one who says that. Anyone who wants to quote anyone who wants to reject Christianity has to go to the Ran, because he's the only one of the regular of the well-known medieval decisors who says that Christianity is monotheism. And actually, in the Middle Ages, they most of them, I think, followed more the view of Rabbeinu Tam and the Tosafist, because it allows you to deal with the non-Jews by saying that they're allowed to a less pure kind of monotheism. So it's not really idolatry. It's not something that we're allowed to do, but but we can do business with them, etc. So that's really the main perspective in the Middle Ages. As I said, they didn't know the Meiri until much later. The Meiri for me is really revolutionary, because he changed it completely. He didn't say, "Oh well, the Christians, they can do it. You know, they don't have to be so pure." He said we have to value their humanity just as we would value the humanity of a Jew, and we have to respect them, etc. Even if they do have mistakes in their beliefs. So, and I wanted to bring some of later sources, so you see that all of the later commentators also do this. They actually base themselves on these sources to prove the same thing. This we saw already. Examples from other examples from for example is that he says that you you can't steal from a non-Jew, that you can't if you have taxes and so on, you have to do what's the right thing to do. He talks about if you're what's it called, if your ox gores an ox of a non-Jew, you have to pay just like you would pay for something that is done to a Jew, and a whole bunch of other things. You cannot let them you cannot let them buy land in the land of Israel, but you can rent, and you can rent them. But that is, he says, even that doesn't apply to the Christians and the Muslims. And also Rav Kook and Rav Ovadia, when they write about, which is much later, it's in the 20th century, the beginning and the end of the 20th century, they are much more lenient when it comes to these monotheistic religions. For example, they asked Rav Kook about the Muslims that when they when they have to do shchita, when they have to kill an animal for food, they say Allahu Akbar. And so can you be there when if you're doing shchita in their territory, can you do it when they're saying these things? And they're also praying in the direction of the east, and we don't necessarily pray to the east. So can we be around them when they do these things? So he very clearly says that you don't have to be so strict on all of these customs because they have no intention of idolatry. And Rav Ovadia writes about praying in mass, and he says not only can you go into it, you can pray in there. And he mentions the Ran, and he's opposed to the Ran because he considers it to be idolatry, because he follows the Rambam, and he says that you can even do business with a Muslim, with a Muslim's wine. You can't drink his wine, but you can do business with his wine, and you can. He says you can pray in their mass, and he says we follow the Rambam as far as this, and we consider that the Muslims are in no way idolatrous, but the Tzitz Eliezer, who was the rabbi of the hospital, he follows the Ran, and that's really weird how people follow the Ran, because almost nobody else has that opinion. He says the Rambam said that the Christians are really idolatry, and he says that the Ran said that they're mistaken, and they even the Muslims are praying not in pure idolatry, and that's why he's completely opposed even to the Muslims as he doesn't accept it, and it's really very few. As I said, it's only the Ran who has that response of saying that you can't accept Islam as monotheism. Yeah, Susan?
Thank you for allowing me to ask a question or make a comment. So this rabbi from Provence, I think this is kind of related to the question that the gentleman asked about the impact each of these different rabbis had in their sphere of influence at the time they lived. Because Provence, I mean, I happen to have had an opportunity to go to Avignon and see the synagogue there and so forth, and the papal palace there, because there was a period of time where there was a pope in Avignon in addition to the pope in Rome. And so you have all these communities throughout Europe, whether they're the Marranos in Spain and Portugal, or whether they're in southern France or Paris, or whether they're in Belgium or Antwerp and London, or you have in Italy, Venice and Rome and so forth. You have all these different communities, and my understanding is many of these rabbis in these communities wrote the responsa, or were the determiner of what that community can do when they were challenged with a difficult situation. And I know also in that time period, transportation took time, communication took a very long time. So, and Maimonides was well known in part because he traveled and he had a position of influence among the Muslims as being a doctor to the Sultan of the ruler in Cairo, and for the royal court. So we have certain rabbis have a lot of influence and fame, and others don't have that much. And that's maybe why we are only finding their responsa decades or centuries after they wrote them. So is
Well,
that, is
there are
that
some- there
something
are
we
some
have
cla-
to acknowledge?
Yeah, there are some classical Rishonim, they're called the rabbis of the Middle Ages that everybody knows. You know, like the Rambam and the Ramban and the Rashba and the Ritzvah and so on. The Meiri was known later, but there are a lot of there are a few really important ones that everybody knows. Of course, you have local rabbis. In the Middle Ages, you already have rabbis who only have local influence in their own communities. It's not like in earlier times when they had much more influence. So we don't, and also take into account that we're before printing, so things get lost.
Yes,
also. It's
sure.
not, but you can see even in what we do have, there is a very wide range because you look at the sources and you apply the rules to the sources, but you have to take into account the time and the place and the circumstances. Actually, that's what happens in any legal system, that you know, even if you have a judge in the court, there's something in the Constitution and there's something in the law, but then you have a very particular case and you have to apply precedents to try and get an answer. You don't always have the answer. So that's what they try to do. They have a new circumstance. They have these new religions, and they have to live among them, and they can't just follow the Talmudic rule that it's all forbidden. I think we have a lot of sources, even if, you know, I'm sure a lot more got lost also because they were all handwritten. But we have a lot of sources, and you can see that as far as idolatry, the vast majority consider it to be Islam is really not questioned as monotheism, and Christianity, they found ways around it, even though Maimonides didn't agree. But you have these two possibilities. One is to say that that Christians, you know, can have some kind of plurality. They don't have to have such a pure monotheism. Though if you talk to Christians, especially theologians, they'll often tell you that they don't have a plurality, that it's just a way of expressing yourself about the different aspects of the deity. And then there are those who will say that, you know, in modern times, you have to treat the non-Jews exactly like you would treat the Jews. Even if there weren't the Meiri, that would probably have had appeared somewhere in the modern time. You know, it's really impressive that he said that in the 14th century, but I'm sure that at some point somebody would have said something similar later on, because we can't behave like that. We expect the world to treat us the same as they treat them, so we can discriminate against everybody else.
And I think also the economics of survival had some impact.
Oh,
I
for
mean,
sure.
you know,
For sure. They
why
lived
would
in
you
non-Jews.
why would you give people an opportunity to transact business in some way at certain points of the week? I mean, I thought it was kind of odd to be able, from the Gittin, to transact business with them on their holidays. Well, if they're having a holiday, would they necessarily be transacting business? So,
Oh, they're not like, it's not like halakha. Halakha, you're not allowed to do business, but the Muslims work on Fridays and the Christians work on Sunday. It's not the same.
mhm,
But
okay.
they what they say in the commentaries is that you don't want them thanking their idols for having made money out of the Jews. I don't know how much that would even resonate with us today. That's what they thought in the Talmudic times. Okay. And I wanted to see something about there is a letter that Maimonides wrote about Jews who were being persecuted in different parts, and he says that the Muslims go and pray in Mecca and other places, and there's a question, can you go to Mecca or not? And he says the craziest Muhammad, killed 24,000 Jews will he be in the world to come, and all kind of questions that people ask about the Muslims, and he tries to answer these people who live among the Muslims and how they have to relate to the Muslims whom they live among. So he says, wait a minute, he says at the end of this letter that he wrote that we should respect these people, and then he says there is a category called Ger Toshav that existed in the land of Israel, which was of the Jews, of the non-Jews who lived among Jews. And the question is whether you could somehow apply this category to non-Jews who observe at least the 7 Noahide laws, and whether you would have a different way of dealing with them than you would have with other non-Jews. But he still insisted with Christians their idolatries, and then Muslims are not. Okay. Any other comments? No? Mimi, you were gonna ask something? No? Okay, so we have the closing section now, which is with the president of Women's League. On your Excel, you have on top a link to the closing session where the president of Women's League will talk, and where we'll have a chance to chat among ourselves a bit before we finish the day. Okay, so go into it when you leave here. Go into the Zoom of the closing session. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Diane.
Bye.